rasmi. Twende ndani ya Ikulu, ladies and gentlemen.
There is a question that is becoming increasingly difficult for the government to answer. Has State House in Kenya slowly stopped looking like a place for governing the country and started looking like a political mobilization center for 2027? Because look at the pattern. Over the past year, President William Ruto has increasingly held meetings at State House with different sections of Kenyan society. Religious leaders, regional delegations, community groups, Boda representatives, and other organized groups. Of course, there is nothing unusual about a president meeting citizens. In fact, it is part of leadership. But politics is not only about what a leader says. Sometimes it is about who is being invited, where they are being invited, how frequently they are being invited, why are they being invited, and what happens after the meeting. And that is where the questions begin. Why bring increasingly large political and community groups to State House? Is this simply presidential engagement? Or is it also becoming a way of building political networks ahead of the 2027 election? Remember, State House is not the headquarters of UDA. It is a public institution, and that distinction matters. If these meetings are purely government engagements, then Kenyans have every right to ask what they cost the taxpayer and whether the expenditure is properly budgeted and accounted for. There have been claims circulating that attendees of these meetings receive 10,000 Kenyan shillings each. Speculations also have it that each group comes with almost 10,000 people. So that is to mean that a staggering 100 million Kenyan shillings for one gathering used in form of handouts, before even considering transport, food, and other expenses.
On Wednesday, 9,000 Muslim leaders pitched tent at the president's official residence. They too left with heavy pockets, everyone pocketing 10,000 shillings. That translates to 19 million shillings. When Thursday came, 27,000 private security personnel came calling, and as a ritual, each left with 5,000 shillings, which translated to 135 million shillings. Cumulatively, the delegations have cobbled a whopping 325 million shillings in 4 days only.
But the bigger issue is not simply the amount. It is the principle and whether the money comes from UDA money or public money. At a time when ordinary Kenyans are complaining about the cost of living, expensive healthcare, and the rising cost of education, every shilling spent by government attracts greater scrutiny. And there is another piece of information that makes this debate even attracts more public attention. Treasury figures reported earlier this year showed that State House expenditure had reached approximately 10.4 billion Kenyan shillings by the end of January 2026, exceeding the 7.7 billion Kenyan shillings recurrent allocation for the entire financial year at that point. Hospitality, travel, and other operational expenses were among the areas that had increased. From this, one thing is automatically clear that a good amount of this money was being spent on State House political mobilization. Considerably, why is expenditure at the center of presidential operations rising so sharply, and how much of that spending is directly connected to genuine government functions? Now consider the political timing. Kenya is moving steadily toward 2027. President Ruto is already facing a politically complicated environment. The opposition is reorganizing, new political alliances are emerging, and the president needs to maintain support across different regions and social groups. So politically, these State House meetings make perfect sense. They're for 2027 political tool. The president uses them to demonstrate accessibility. He uses them to reward loyal groups with presidential attention. He uses them to strengthen relationships with influential community leaders. And perhaps most importantly, he creates a sense that different groups or topical Kenyans have direct access to the presidency without discrimination. That is powerful political currency and strategy. So the question is not whether Ruto should meet Kenyans. The question is where the line between governance and campaigning is drawn. And that line becomes even more important when public resources are involved. Take the recent OL Kalu by-election. There were allegations that government resources were used to help the ruling UDA candidate. But the government has rejected such claims. Public Service CS Jeffrey Ruku said UDA spent about 100 million Kenyan shillings on the campaign and insisted that the money came from the party, not the national exchequer. However, most Kenyans aren't yet convinced. That statement is important because it presents the government's side of the story. Now that brings us to why Kenyans are asking increasingly uncomfortable questions about the relationship between government activity and party politics. If government development projects are announced during an election period, is that normal service delivery or bribery? Or can the timing create a political advantage for the ruling party? There is no simple answer. A responsible government must continue working even during elections. But when government officials openly campaign for the ruling party at the same time public resources are being deployed in the same areas, suspicion naturally follows. And that is the real political problem facing the Kenya Kwanza administration. Even when an expenditure is technically legitimate, citizens can still question whether it represents the best use of public resources. And in politics, perception can sometimes become more damaging than the original controversy. For Ruto, therefore, statehouse is becoming more than just a physical and governance building. It is becoming a political machine. And that's exactly how the oppositions are even seeing it. To his supporters, it may represent a president who is accessible, organized, and actively engaging different sections of society. So in my conclusion, if these meetings are about governing as the Kenya Kwanza government proclaims, why shouldn't the government publish clear information about their costs, funding sources, and purpose? Transparency would settle much of the debate. Because public money is not political money. It belongs to the people. And as the 2027 election approaches, Kenyans will be watching not only what politicians promise, but also how government resources are used and whether public institutions remain clearly separated from campaign politics. So, has State House simply become a more active center of presidential engagement? Or are Kenyans witnessing the gradual transformation of the presidency into a 2027 political mobilization machine? What do you think? Tell me your thoughts in the comments.